My name is Nora McAllister, I'm 34 and I belong to 240 acres of black Iowa soil the way a person belongs to their own hands. I teach AG sciences at the high school in town. I can read a soil test like a love letter and a balance sheet like a weather map. Our place sits along County D12 where the road breaks into gravel and the sky gets honest. Corn to the horizon, a windbreak of cottonwoods, and a red barn I used to measure myself against as a kid to prove I was growing. Our farm has been in the family for 5 generations. My great-grandfather put up the barn in 1919 and signed his name inside the south wall under a coat of milk paint. Every McAllister child has been lifted to trace those letters with their fingertips. My dad said land keeps a ledger, and honor is the only currency that doesn't devalue with rain. Dad died 2 springs ago, just after we'd no-tilled soybeans into corn stubble and right before the cottonwoods leafed. Mom has been gone even longer. My brother Caleb and I inherited equal halves on paper if not in practice. He was always more comfortable in town than under a sky that big, but after Dad's stroke he moved back to help, or that's what he said. He handled the bills and the marketing because I had students and the FFA kids and the farm doesn't pause because grief does. I knew this land by its smells and sounds. Wet soil after a slow rain, diesel on cold mornings, the crackle of corn leaves in late September like applause for a show we put on every year and never quite perfected. I also knew when something was wrong, and the first wrong thing was orange survey tape fluttering from a hedge post along the section line. It was a March Saturday, gray and windy. I was hauling a salt block out to June Holloway's fence line because her cows have opinions about everything and my existence annoys them less when they're mineral satisfied. The tape caught the corner of my eye. Bright, intentional, not ours. I set the block down and followed the stakes. They ran in a neat diagonal across the North 40 where we'd put wheat as a break crop and left space for the old orchard. The stakes didn't respect the orchard. They ran through it like a sentence that didn't need commas. 2 days later a laminated sign appeared at the end of the road by the mailbox. Notice of public hearing, rezoning request. County seal. Case number. Applicant. Prairie Ridge Development LC. Proposal. AG2R3 residential. My mouth went dry in that particular way where your body tries to wake you up from something that is, unfortunately, your waking life. I called Caleb before I called anyone else. Did you see the sign? I asked, trying to keep my voice in the usable range. He sighed like a man who had been inconvenienced by weather. Yeah. I meant to tell you. It's just an option, he said. They're testing the waters. We should listen. An option on what? I asked. On our farm. It's complicated, he said. Don't freak out, Nora. There's a lot of money on the table. We've been barely breaking even. Dad left more debt than you realize. You can't rezone what you don't own, I said, because a thing can be both obvious and the only thing available to say. He made a small impatient noise. Developers move fast. This is a chance to not be poor for the rest of our lives. Then softer, an old trick. Trust me. I hung up and didn't trust him. At school during third period soils I watched my students run pH strips like tiny chemists and thought about the way paper, legal paper, can change the shape of dirt. After the bell I called Uncle Ray from the prep room because the office always smells like potting mix and that makes me braver. Ray, I said, tell me everything you know about our deed and any ghosts attached to it. He was quiet in the way men are who grew up when words were rationed for sense. Your granddad did 2 smart things, he said. Recorded the Century Farm designation and put a note in a refinance back in '98 when interest fell. I think there's a right of first refusal in there somewhere. Lineal heirs. He loved saying that phrase like it tasted fancy. You're sure? I'm old, not senile, he said. Go to the courthouse. Ask for Evelyn. She'll find it. Bring cookies if you want it quick. The county recorder's office is 1 flight up and always 5 degrees colder than the hallway. The desks are a soft beige and the pens are on chains. Evelyn Cho had a neat stack of plats on her blotter and an expression I call useful neutrality. I slid a Tupperware of oatmeal cookies across and told her who I was, what I was looking for and what I hoped to find. Family name, she asked, already typing. McAllister, I said. Parcel 13-07-400-003. She found the chain of title, scrolled and stopped. Here, she said, printing. Memorandum of Right of First Refusal, recorded 1998, attached to a refinance deed of trust. Grantors, Daniel and Ruth McAllister. Beneficiaries, lineal descendants of Daniel and Ruth Sturpes. She looked at me over the paper. That's you and your brother. My heart did a strange double beat, fear and relief arguing in the same second. How does it work? She tapped the margin notes with a red nail. If the owner receives a bona fide offer to purchase the property, they must give written notice to the lineal descendants. Descendants have 30 days to match and 90 days to close. If they match, the owner must sell to them at the same price and terms. It also mentions access. Existing ingress/egress easement across Holloway parcel recorded 1974 shall be for agricultural use only. She paused. That will matter to a developer. I thanked her and asked for certified copies like a person who had suddenly remembered what oxygen is for. On the way out I almost ran into a woman in a navy suit reading the rezoning notice tacked to the public board. Dana Whitaker I knew from the business pages. Prairie Ridge. She smiled with the cool efficiency of people who think through other people. Exciting time, she said, nodding toward the notice. This county's growing. Good to see the next generation moving on from row crops. Kept my face calm. Some of us don't call it moving on, I said. Some of us call it forgetting. She laughed like I'd told a joke we both understood. I respect heritage, she said. But heritage doesn't pay property taxes. Neither does a half-finished subdivision when the money dries up, I said before I could stop myself. I left before I learned what her face does when confused. Back at the farm I walked the North 40 with a legal pad and a bad mood. The orchard that my grandmother had started in coffee cans sat in a crooked L21 trees that had survived drought, cicadas, and the brief era when Caleb tried to mow courage into straight lines. Survey stakes crossed the root lines like they did not care that roots are stories you cannot see. The Holloway access lane cut along the fence and onto our land like the quiet promise it had always been. One gravel strip, wide enough for a tractor and a funeral procession if needed. The 1974 easement language, for agricultural use only, landed loud in my head. A developer could not run concrete trucks over a lane promised for feed and harvest. I called June from the fence line. Your lane, I said, the easement says agricultural use only. That's what it says, she answered, voice steady as winter. I've kept it graded out of respect. I don't grade for bulldozers. Would you be willing to confirm that in writing if needed? For you, yes, she said. For a man with shiny shoes, no. I stood there with the phone in my hand and felt for the first time since the orange tape, the faintest shift, like a heavy gate freeing on its hinge. That night Caleb showed up without warning in a truck that looked more expensive than breathing. He leaned on the counter and tried a smile I used to fall for when we were kids and he'd broken something of mine. Let's talk like family, he said. Family tells the hard thing first, I said. That was the rule. He exhaled. Fine. I signed a purchase agreement, he said, quick like ripping a bandage. Prairie Ridge made an offer above appraisal. It solves everything. Debt, taxes, the combine that's a decade past useful. They gave me a signing bonus for putting it under contract before the spring market. We close in 90 days. You can't sell without me, I said. We co-own. He looked too pleased with himself. Technically we hold title as tenants in common. I signed for my interest and an option on yours. Their lawyers say it's clean. If you refuse they can force a partition sale. This way we keep some control. You mean you keep the bonus, I said. He flushed. I'm trying to save us. You're married to nostalgia. Nostalgia doesn't have a recording number, I said and pulled the certified ROFR memo from a folder on the table. This does. You were supposed to notify me and Uncle Ray before you signed anything. I have 30 days to match and 90 to close. At the same price and terms. He stared at the paper the way people stare at weather radar when they were planning a picnic. Where would you get the money? That's not your problem, I said. But your other problem is access. June's easement is for agriculture only. If you sell for development she can lawfully say no to concrete. And then you've sold a landlocked field to a woman who smiles like a spreadsheet. He rubbed his temples. You always did this, he said. Turned everything into homework. This is simple. Cash out and move on. Caleb, I said quieter, you sold something you didn't build and you didn't ask. That isn't moving on. That's leaving a mess with a check stapled to it. He left with the performative rattle of a man who thinks noise equals authority. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the house settle, the barn creak, the wind move through the cottonwoods like someone deciding. Then I called May Delgado, the AG lawyer everyone uses when they want their names spelled right in the minutes. She met me the next morning in an office that smelled like coffee and rural newspapers. I laid out the ROFR, the easement, the rezoning notice, and a handwritten list of questions that felt like a fence line. May read without speaking. Then she tapped the memo. "This is real," she said. "Old but real. The ROFR runs with the land. If Prairie Ridge has a signed contract, they must give you notice and a copy. Your clock starts on receipt. They cannot close over you. If they try, you can record a notice of exercise and cloud their title." "What about access?" I asked. "Access is brilliant," she said, not smiling so I would know she meant it. "Developers live and die by ingress/egress and utilities. If the only practical access is that Holloway Lane and it's limited to agricultural use, their plat won't pass review without a different route. That buys you time. Time can be money if you make friends with it." "What about the rezoning hearing?" "Show up," she said. "Bring neighbors. But don't make it about nostalgia. Make it about drainage, traffic, school capacity, comprehensive plan, prime soils. Counties hear poetry. They vote on infrastructure. And call the drainage district. If they're planning to tile or reroute, there are notice requirements. A paused drainage certificate can stall a plat a year." I breathed like someone had opened a window. "If I match," I said, "I still have to pay developer price. I don't have that money." "You have options," May said. Heartland Land Trust has a rapid response fund for endangered AG parcels. They can partner with a conservation buyer to place a permanent agricultural easement at closing, lowering the value while paying you enough to match. You would become the operator or lease to a farmer of your choosing under the easement. The land stays a farm forever. "It sounds too tidy," I said. "It sounds like work," she countered. "But clean work." On the way home I stopped at the drainage district office. Hank Morales wore a cap that said, "Water doesn't lie." He pulled the drainage maps and traced our farm's tile lines with a blunt finger. "Any development north of you would need to upsize the main and build a retention cell," he said. "They can't do that without us. We haven't seen an engineering submission. If we do, we'll notice adjoining owners." "That's you." He slid me a copy of the rules and apologized that they read like the Bible if Moses had been a civil engineer. At dusk I drove to June Holloway's place with fresh cinnamon rolls because some conversations ask for sugar. Her farmhouse porch light throws a circle of honesty I've trusted since I was tall enough to reach the mailbox. "I'm not asking you to fight my brother," I said. "I'm asking whether you'll confirm in writing that your easement is for agriculture only and that you will enforce it." She took the pan and set it on the swing. "I don't sell my word," she said. "I also don't lease it to bulldozers." She went inside and came back with a shoebox of papers tied with a baler twine bow. "My Harold kept everything," she said. She sifted, found a yellowed copy of the 1974 easement and handed it to me. In the margin Harold had written for tractors and feed, not subdivisions. I wanted to cry and decided instead to stand up straighter. When I got home the notice from Prairie Ridge was waiting. Courier envelope, cover letter from a lawyer with a name that could sell crisp shirts. Pursuant to the Memorandum of Right of First Refusal recorded as Instrument 98 to 2417, please accept notice of a bona fide offer. Contract enclosed. Purchase price that made my stomach turn and my math brain start doing push-ups. 30 days to match. 90 to close. A list of conditions precedent that read like a scavenger hunt. Rezoning approval, access confirmation, drainage sign-off, utility commitment. I set the packet on the kitchen table, next to Dad's old seed cap and a pile of seed catalogs I probably wouldn't order from this year if I lost. I ran my finger along the line of type where my name sat like a thumbtack holding history to a corkboard. Lineal descendant. Granddad's favorite fancy phrase. For the first time I liked it not because it made me feel noble, but because it connected me by ink to a responsibility I had already accepted in my body. I didn't sleep much. When I did, I dreamed I was 10 again, standing in the south bay of the barn, tracing great-granddad's name under milk paint, feeling the ridges of letters and the slight grit of old dust under my fingernails. In the dream the paint warmed under my hand like skin, and a hinge somewhere I couldn't see gave a soft, relieved click. In the morning I made coffee too strong and wrote a timeline on legal paper with times I could point to: survey stakes spotted, rezoning notice posted, recorder search, ROFR memo, access easement, conversation with Caleb, meeting with May, drainage visit, June's shoebox oath, courier delivery. I took photos of every page and emailed them to myself and to May with the subject line farm, clock running. Then I dialed the Heartland Land Trust number May had scribbled under options, and left my name and the phrase rapid response. Priyanka called back within an hour with a voice like fresh water and steps like a checklist. "We can meet this afternoon," she said. "Bring the contract and the ROR. We'll talk about a match and assign structure. If we move fast." I hung up and looked out the kitchen window. The North 40 was a quilt of dull green and brown, wheat just thinking about waking, orchard branches black against the sky. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk held in wind like a hand. The title of this story lives in my mouth now: The Family Farm Betrayal, and it is true, but it's not all of it. Betrayal is a cut. It is not a map. The map sat on my table. Old ink, new paper, lines drawn by men who never thought a woman would read them like sheet music. I ran my finger under the words right of first refusal and felt something quiet and exact line up inside me. I didn't have revenge, not yet. What I had was a lawful lever and the start of a plan to pull it. And that was enough to open the door. By noon I was sitting at a conference table in the Heartland Land Trust office across from Priyanka Das, who moved through files like a person who knew which drawer held which kind of miracle. She poured coffee and let me lay out the packet: right of first refusal, purchase contract, access easement, rezoning notice, and my timeline written in block letters so my fear would mind its manners. "We do this a few times a year," she said, tapping the ROR with the back of her pen. "A developer finds a lever, debt, loneliness, age, and uses speed. We respond with paper and timing. If you want to exercise this ROFR, we'll help you match the offer, then record a permanent agricultural conservation easement at closing. The easement reduces market value going forward in exchange for conservation money coming in now. You operate under it or lease to a farmer who will. Either way, the land stays a farm." "Heartland buys the farm?" I asked. "Sometimes. More often we pair you with a conservation buyer who can wire funds quickly in exchange for that easement. We also have a rapid response bridge we can deploy if timing gets tight. But first, notice." The 30-day clock is bright red in my head. "What does notice look like?" I said. "It looks like certainty," she answered. "Your lawyer serves written notice of intent to exercise to the seller and the buyer under the contract, attaches the ROFR, and encloses whatever earnest money the contract requires. Simultaneously, we record a memorandum of exercise with the county so any title search sees you in the chain. That clouds an attempt to slide past you." I looked at the price again, numbers that tasted like iron, and let my practical brain drive. "I can't buy at that number on my own." "You aren't on your own," she said. "If Heartland backs you, we structure a match and assign. You match now. At closing you assign your purchase right for the net price to a conservation buyer who funds, we record the easement, and you roll into a long-term ground lease with first right to buy at encumbered value later. You get to be the farmer, not the mark." Sounded like threading a needle in a windstorm. It also sounded like work I understood. Steps, deadlines, witnesses. I left with a one-page letter of intent from Heartland, contingent, sensible, proof we weren't bluffing, and met May back at her office, where she drafted the notice of intent to exercise so tight it squeaked. She slid it to me with a stack of addressed envelopes, one to Prairie Ridges Council, one to Caleb because the memo required notice to owners, and one to the escrow agent named in the contract with a certified check for the exact earnest money. "We'll also file this," she said, tapping a 2-page memorandum of ROFR exercise with my name and parcel number in clean type. "Evelyn will stamp it. Then anyone searching title will see you." I carried the envelopes like they were a heart in a cooler and drove straight to the courthouse. Evelyn took the memorandum with the faintest smile a neutral person ever allows themselves and slid it under the stamp with a satisfying thunk. "Recorded," she said, reading off the instrument number while I wrote it down twice. I walked out lighter, not because the problem had shrunk but because it now had a file number and things with numbers can be moved. I texted June a thank you. She replied, "Come by after chores." When I arrived, she had already typed and printed a 1-paragraph affidavit of easement intent, the plainest sentence I've ever loved. I, June Holloway, Declare under penalty of perjury that the 1974 ingress/egress easement across my parcel to the McAllister farm is granted and maintained for agricultural use only and shall not be used for construction traffic or non-agricultural subdivision access. She signed it in front of a notary at the credit union and handed me 2 copies. Folks like to pretend words are fog, she said. Some words are fences. That afternoon, Hank at the drainage district answered my call on the second ring. Any developer plans filed on our branch? I asked. None yet, he said. If they do, we'll post notice and hold a public meeting because upsizing a main isn't a private affair. If they get frisky before that, call me. I hung up and walked the North 40 until the wind rinsed me clean. The orange stakes still stood in a neat diagonal, but they looked less like a verdict and more like a dare. 2 days later, the certified letters did their work. Prairie Ridge's council acknowledged receipt of my exercise and requested proof of funds within 15 days per contract. Caleb sent a text with a photo of the notice folded on our old kitchen table, followed by 5 messages oscillating between fury and persuasion. You don't have the cash. We can be rich, Nora. You're embarrassing me. Dad would have taken the money. Don't be stubborn. I answered exactly once and only with logistics. All communications through council. I forwarded his text to Officer Priya Shah with a brief note. No threats, just pressure. And she replied with a thumbs up and log it. Keep your lane, call if tone changes. The rezoning hearing loomed like weather 4 days out. May made me a list and I turned it into a plan. Bring letters from the drainage district about capacity review, from June about agricultural-only access, from Heartland about the farm century status and the pending ROFR exercise, from neighbors about traffic on D12 and school bus turns, and from my students' parents about AG education and prime soils serving a public good. Don't make it sentimental, May reminded me. Make it about the county's comprehensive plan. Read their words back to them. I photocopied the relevant page from the plan where it calls our band of soil prime farmland, Class 1 and 2, protected in place wherever feasible. I highlighted the sentence, put it in a plastic sleeve and wrote in the margin. You wrote this. Keep it. Uncle Ray found a photograph of my great-grandfather's Century Farm certificate. I set it on a small easel because paper sometimes likes to stand up for itself. In the middle of this, Dana Whitaker called. Her voice was so calm it hummed. You've complicated a straightforward transaction, she said. Prairie Ridge is willing to discuss a coexistence agreement. We'll carve out your house site in a sentimental 8 acres. You agree not to oppose rezoning. Win-win. I looked out the window at the thin line of cottonwoods standing like guardians and imagined them edging a cul-de-sac named after them. No, I said. The farm isn't a logo. And the ROFR isn't sentimental. Her pause told me she wasn't used to no. We have partition options, she said, cool as steel. We'll use them. You can try, I said. But the memorialized exercise in the recorder's office is hard to partition around. See you at the hearing. That night I filed 4 public records requests with the county. Emails between staff and Prairie Ridge about the rezoning case. Any pre-application utility capacity letters. Any traffic study scoping memos. And notes from the school district on enrollment trends for our area. If Prairie Ridge wanted to move fast, I wanted to stand exactly where quick feet slip. The days filled like a bin. May drafting, Priyanka calling potential conservation buyers, June checking fence, Hank emailing me scanned maps from the 70s showing tile lines like veins. Evelyn flagged a utility commitment letter buried in the rezoning file. The water department could conditionally commit if a 12-inch main was extended at the developer's expense. Conditional was my new favorite word. On Thursday, Heartland brought a candidate to the farm. A quiet couple, Ben and Lila, who run an organic operation 2 counties over and had been looking for a long-term anchor parcel. They walked the fields with me without talking much, which I appreciated more than I could express. At the orchard, Lila stopped and touched the bark of a battered Harrelson apple like greeting a relative. We'd put this in a permanent easement with you as operator, she said finally. Long lease, fair rent. We're not looking to flip. We're looking to belong. Belong is a word that can be misused. In Lila's mouth it sounded like a contract the land itself would countersign. May converted the conversation into paper. The match and assign structure looked like legal Jenga. I'd exercise the ROFR and step into the purchase agreement. Ben and Lila's LC would assign funds to my escrow. On the day of closing, I'd assign my buyer's rights to their LLC for exactly the contract price. Simultaneously, Heartland would record the agricultural conservation easement and Ben and Lila would sign a 30-year ground lease to me with an option to purchase at the encumbered appraised value when I was ready. Everyone would sign a no subdivision covenant just because it felt like singing the last verse in tune. Will Caleb still get his check? I asked, practical even in victory. He will, May said. The contract price is the contract price. Your revenge, if you want that word, is that he doesn't get to turn the farm into his exit and your ghost. He gets paid fair market under the rules he tried to dodge. You get the land's future. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The Planning and Zoning Commission hearing felt like the whole county had put on clean jeans. The room smelled like coffee in 2 small cups and the energy of people who have opinions about ditches. Dana wore navy and certainty and had a consultant with a stack of renderings, curving streets with names that offended me more than the streets, and upon the color of a new bruise. Caleb sat 2 rows back in a sport coat our mother would have said he couldn't afford. I went to the podium with May's bullet points under my palm and the comprehensive plan page clipped on top. I introduced myself as Nora McAllister, 5th generation on the McAllister Century Farm, AG teacher at the high school, and lineal heir exercising an on-record right of first refusal that made any action premature. Then I did what May had told me to do. I kept it on infrastructure and policy, prime soils and the county's own language, drainage capacity and the lack of an engineering submission, traffic on D12 and the school bus turn radius at the blacktop, water mains and conditional letters, the Holloway easement affidavits, agricultural only, no construction access. I did not say how my great-grandfather's name feels under my fingers. I let the Century Farm certificate on its easel do that work. Neighbors spoke, June with her affidavit, Uncle Ray with the measured disapproval of a man who has outlived every trend but still knows a bad one, 2 bus drivers with notebooks, a nurse from the clinic who sees what gravel dust does to lungs. Dana answered with economy. We meet demand where it lives, she said. The region needs attainable housing. We'll manage drainage, widen the road, fund a turn lane. The comprehensive plan is a guide, not a straitjacket. Heritage matters, but so do families needing homes. A commissioner asked about access, specifically the Holloway lane. We'll acquire additional access, the consultant said airily, if necessary. From whom? The commissioner asked, and the room made that low sound rooms make when it recognizes it's being asked to suspend belief. They voted to continue the application to the next meeting pending staff reports on drainage, access, and school capacity, and to allow time for a private ROFR matter to resolve. Not denial but the pause we needed wrapped in procedure. I walked out into a March wind that was finally on my side. Priyanka called before I got to the truck. We have a yes, she said simply. Ben and Lila's funding is approved. We can move the second you need the letter. What about timing? I asked, thinking of the 90-day close in the original contract. We'll beat it, she said. But we'll also make them miss their conditions so even if they wanted to close fast they couldn't. Everything they need, rezoning, access, drainage, is now on your schedule. The next morning, Prairie Ridge sent a demand for proof of funds, trying to push me onto a field of their choosing. May sent back letters of commitment from Heartland and Ben and Lila's lender, plus a copy of the recorded memorandum of my exercise. We're ready to perform, she wrote. We trust you will be as well. Caleb tried a softer approach at dusk on the porch steps where we had once counted fireflies. Nora, he said because he remembered that names are keys. I'm in deep. The signing bonus is already gone. If you blow this up, I'm cooked. I didn't blow anything up, I said, tired enough to skip embroidery. You sold your integrity and tried to put the receipt in my pocket. I'm buying the farm you almost lost. Take your check when it comes and pay whoever you need to pay. Then let the land forget your hurry. He closed his eyes like someone counting backwards. You think you're the hero, he said, which is what people say when they have mistaken speed for courage. I think I'm the heir who read, I said. And the teacher who learned to prefer quiet victories. He left without slamming the door, which was its own progress. 2 more filings turned the screws without ruining the board. May submitted a notice to the title company that any deed out of our parcel before the ROFR closing would be challenged, and that a lease pendens could be filed if necessary. We hoped not to need it. Priyanka filed the easement draft language with the conservation appraisal firm to start the clock on that report. Hank formally noticed a drainage review meeting for any upsizing in our branch. No one had applied, but the notice reminded the county that water moves by rules, not renderings. I worked my actual job in between: lectures on soil horizons, a lab on infiltration rates where my freshmen learned what a stopwatch can teach you, an after-school FFA meeting where my kids practiced parliamentary procedure like they might need to run the world someday. Kept my heart from shrinking to the size of a parcel number. One evening after chores, I found June at the fence, hands in her coat pockets and a look I have only ever seen on people who have learned to live without drama and without apology. "I wrote one more letter," she said, fishing an envelope from her pocket. It was addressed to the county engineer. A clear statement that the Holloway Lane would be locked to non-AG use and that any attempt to trespass construction equipment would be met with a chain and a call to the sheriff. "I'm old," she said, not gentle. I laughed and then cried right there in the wind. She looked away politely and pretended to adjust a mitten. Evelyn called with a tip only a recorder would know. "Prairie Ridge filed a memorandum of contract when they signed Caleb," she said, "to reserve their interest. Your memorandum of exercise now sits on top of theirs. If they try to assign, any buyer will see your stamp first." I thanked her and wrote the instrument numbers like coordinates to a place I was walking toward on foot. By the end of the month, the file on my table had turned into a binder. Tabs for ROFR easements, rezoning, drainage, utilities, funding, correspondence. I sharpened one pencil purely for the pleasure of seeing a clean point. Tasha, my friend from Charlotte who had talked me through other kinds of paperwork once upon a time, sent a text that said I'd hire you to run a country. I set the phone face down and took the compliment the land's way, silently. On a rainy Tuesday, Ben and Lila came back with their lender to walk the fields for the conservation appraisal. The lender wore boots that had known mud before and asked exactly 3 questions, each of which revealed a person who had seen people try to call granite frosting. We stood by the south bay of the barn and I showed them where Great-Granddad had signed his name under the milk paint. Lila touched the letters with 2 fingers and didn't say a word. It felt like a vow done correctly. Short, witnessed, binding. The next morning, Prairie Ridge blinked. Their counsel sent a letter proposing to extend closing and reduce earnest money penalties if we would withdraw our exercise. "You can keep the farmhouse and 10 acres, the letter offered, generous like a man tipping with somebody else's wallet. May's reply belonged in a museum of polite refusals. Client declines. Client stands ready to close under the contract you drafted, match term for term, on or before the original closing date. Please direct further proposals to your conscience." We were ready, commitment letters signed, escrow pre-wired, easement draft in its 3rd and final form with 2 little words I loved more than pancakes on a snow day: in perpetuity. On the last Friday before the rescheduled rezoning hearing, the developer's second try, Officer Shaw called to check in. "Any heat?" she asked. "Only from paper," I said. "Which is the kind I like." "Then this is me reminding you that the real victory is boring," she said. "Walk in, let the rules do their work and walk out. Call me if you need me to stand in the back of the room and be a level." "I think we've built enough levels to stand on," I said, looking at the binder, at the stack of letters with letterheads that now agreed with each other, at the notarized affidavit stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like an ear of corn. That night I sat at the kitchen table with Uncle Ray and June, and we ate stew out of bowls that had been in the house since my mother was young. We didn't talk about strategy anymore. We talked about calves and seed and the price of hay and whether the cottonwoods would leaf early this year. When they left, I washed dishes like a person whose hands remember their job and dried the table like it was an altar. The binder was zipped. The notice of exercise lay under a paperweight with a fossil in it. The assignment papers were clipped together with a blue ribbon because I'm sentimental even when I pretend not to be. The easement language waited with its small, ferocious in perpetuity. We weren't trying to stop the clock. We were aligning it. On one side, their conditions precedent ticking toward failure. On our side, funds, filings, friends. In the morning we would walk into the county building and let the room learn what the land already knew. The hearing room felt like every public room I've ever trusted. Acoustic tiles, a flag on a wooden pole, microphones that made ordinary voices sound braver. Farmers had put on their clean jeans. Consultants had put on an extra layer of confidence. Dana Whitaker stood near a foam core rendering of curved streets and a pond the color of a headache. Caleb sat on the aisle in a jacket that looked expensive and wrong at the same time. When our case was called, staff read the file into the record. Parcel numbers, applicant, the request to rezone AG to R3 residential, and a neat list of missing pieces. Access unresolved, drainage analysis pending, school capacity letter outstanding, ROFR exercise recorded. I heard the click in the room as those 4 facts sat down beside each other like a committee that had already voted. Dana went first. She spoke in a tone meant to calm cattle and commissions. Prairie Ridge is prepared to invest in infrastructure. We have a conditional water commitment. We'll widen D12 at our expense. This is housing the county needs. A commissioner asked, "What is your primary access point?" She said, "Holloway Lane with improvements," as if a woman's name were a suggestion. Another commissioner held up June's affidavit. "The recorded easement is for agricultural use only," he said. "Have you secured an alternative?" Dana glanced at her consultant the way a person looks for a credit card that isn't in their wallet. "We're in conversations," she said. The room heard no. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the microphone with May's bullet points and the county comprehensive plan page clipped on top. I introduced myself. Nora McAllister, 5th-generation operator of the McAllister Century Farm, AG teacher, and lineal heir who had exercised an on-record right of first refusal. I did not say the word betrayal. I said infrastructure and policy. I pointed staff to the plan language they wrote themselves. Prime farmland, class 1 and 2, protected in place wherever feasible. I set June's affidavit on the document camera and let the words fill the screen. Agricultural use only. I summarized Hank's notice that any upsizing of the drainage main would require a separate public process with engineering they did not yet have. I read from the school district's email. Portable classrooms were full. Bus turns at D12 already required awkward choreography. I spoke slowly then stopped. Silence is a tool when you trust it. Neighbors followed. June, plain steel, said, "My lane is for tractors and feed. I will chain it if I have to." Uncle Ray said, "We've seen booms. You can set your watch by the busts." 2 bus drivers held up notebook diagrams of turnarounds that already scared them. A nurse from the clinic explained dust, asthma, and 40 cement trucks a day. Dana asked to rebut. She promised proffers and turn lanes. She reminded the room that families need homes, which is true and not an argument against farms. She said the comprehensive plan was a guide, not a straitjacket. A commissioner said, "It's not a straitjacket. It's a seatbelt." In a farm county that lands. The vote wasn't fireworks. It was procedure done right. Motion to deny without prejudice based on inconsistency with the plan, unresolved access limited to agricultural use, incomplete drainage analysis and pending private ROFR exercise. I passed. I didn't look at Caleb. I didn't need to. The word denied has a specific gravity. Outside, the March wind felt like a long exhale. Priyanka called before I reached the truck. "Decision?" she asked. "Denied," I said, and she said, "Good. Funds are ready. We'll move when your lawyer gives the word." "Tomorrow," I said. The clock I'd been living inside lifted off my ribs enough that I could take a full breath. That evening, May sent one email that made a month of careful work stand up straight. Subject line, McAllister ROFR, ready to close. She attached Heartland's commitment letter and Ben and Lila's lender's wire instructions. To Prairie Ridge, she wrote, "My client stands ready to perform under the contract you drafted, match term for term, on or before the original closing date. Please furnish escrow info for deed and settlement statement." To the title company, she wrote, "Please note recorded memorandum of ROFR exercise, instrument hashtag, and schedule closing for the buyer of record, to be assigned at table pursuant to attached assignment of purchaser's rights." Polite. Sterile. Final. I slept like a person who had given her worry a job and watched it do it. Closing day looked nothing like TV. It was a windowless room with a table that could host a baptism, a fight, or both. May and I sat on one side with Ben and Lila, steady as fence posts. Priyanka took a chair by the copier like she'd been born there. On the other side, Prairie Ridge's counsel, brisk and pink at the edges, and Caleb, looking like someone had taken the glossy finish off him with sandpaper. The settlement statement listed the contract price that had haunted me in the dark. Below it, credits and debits shuffled into columns. taxes prorated, recording fees, courier this and that. Earnest money applied. Wire confirmation paper clipped on top with 2 signatures and a magic number only banks love. We signed like grown-ups. First, I signed the assignment of purchaser's rights, transferring my buyer position to Ben and Lila's LLC for exactly the contract price. Then Prairie Ridge's counsel slid the deed across for Caleb and me to sign as sellers of our respective interests. Mine going to the assignee I had chosen, his going to the same. He hesitated, pen hovering, then scrawled with a hand that had learned consequences. When the last page turned face down, Priyanka handed the conservation easement to the closer. It read like a vow that likes lawyers. No subdivision, no conversion to non-AG use, soil conservation practices, public reporting every 5 years in perpetuity. We all signed that too with pens that wrote heavier than ink. It was, in the end, uneventful, which is the best ending I've learned to want. The title company courier left to record. For 20 minutes we all drank stale coffee and stared at a fake plant. Then the courier came back with a stamp on his face and Evelyn's recording numbers on a receipt. Deed recorded. Easement recorded. Assignment recorded. Memorandum of exercise already there, smiling like a firstborn. Congratulations, the closer said, exactly as if we had just accomplished paperwork. Which we had. Which is how revolutions prefer to look when they're done correctly. Prairie Ridge's counsel gathered her files and left without small talk. Caleb stayed because he had to wait for his check like everyone else. He looked at Ben and Lila like they were a language he didn't speak, then at me. You could have taken the easy money, he said. There isn't easy money, I said. There's money that costs something you can't afford. He glanced at the door, the hall, any exit but the one he'd made. The signing bonus is gone, he said, so quiet it almost sounded like an apology. I thought I could fix everything before anyone noticed. You did fix something, I said. You fixed my tendency to assume the best. I will send a payment schedule for your debts with your check. Pay them. Start over where you can't sell anything that doesn't belong to you. He swallowed, jaw working. Are you going to tell people I shook my head. I'm going to farm. Paper tells its own stories. The checks arrived with the courier. The closer counted them gently like eggs. Caleb took his and left, the door closing softly in the way defeat sometimes behaves when it's tired. When he was gone, Ben said, "Walk us one more time?" We drove the lane slowly, the Holloway gravel firm under the tires like principle, then across the North 40 where the orange stakes had learned humility. At the orchard, Lila crouched to look at the ground, sifted a handful of soil like you would warm flour and nodded. Good life here, she said. We talked in simple words. Rotation, cover, fences, leases. We agreed that I would run my acres as operator under the easement and lease the rest to them for 3 years while I rebuilt capital. We picked a date for a field day with my students when the ground warmed enough to justify lemonade. That evening the house felt different. Not bigger. Truer. I pulled the old frame from the hallway and set it on the table. The black and white photo of 2 kids with a handwritten pact didn't make my throat hurt the way it had. I slid the photo out, set it beside the recorded easement receipt and the deed recording numbers, and smiled at the idea of keeping paper where it could see itself. I put a single sheet behind the glass, a copy of the easement's first page, and hung it back up. If anyone asked what art it was, I would say a landscape, and I would be right. 2 mornings later, Evelyn called from the recorder's office just to say congratulations. We don't get to say that often, she said. Mostly we stamp and file and go home with ink on our fingers. It's nice to know which way a story went. I brought her cinnamon rolls and left a stack of thank you notes on 3 desks. Evelyn's, Hank's, and the county planners who had been patient about the comprehensive plan citations. Small civility is good ballast. Spring did what spring does. The cottonwoods budded like someone turning on a light. The wheat on the North 40 woke and stretched. Ben and I laid out a cover crop plan for the acres that would rest. We flagged the orchard rows for a little drip line and a lot of pruning. My students came out on a Saturday with borrowed shovels and opinions, and we spent a morning planting windbreak seedlings along the west line, red osier dogwood and serviceberry that would feed birds and a future we wanted to deserve. We took a picture by the Century Farm sign and I sent copies to anyone who had signed a piece of paper for me in the last month. One afternoon, June waved me over to the fence. "Whole county's been gossiping on your behalf," she said, eyes kind. "Let them. It's healthier than the other way." She nodded at the Holloway Lane. I chained it for a day just to feel like a person in a story. Then I unlocked it. Feed truck needed through. Balance, she said, as if that word were a piece of equipment she kept in the barn. In April, the school board invited me to speak about prime soils and why AG classes matter. I brought a jar of our field, a jar of subsoil, and a jar of coarse sand. I tipped each onto trays and poured water across. The soil took it in like a welcome. The sand shrugged and let it run. We don't just teach kids to plant things, I said. We teach them what holds what we put in their hands. At home, Caleb texted once more in a tone that didn't make me brace. Paid the last card. Moving to Cedar Rapids. Working for a seed distributor. I won't be back for a while. Tell Uncle Ray sorry I missed his birthday. I typed back. Pay your debts, keep your word, plant something and take care of it. It was all the conversation I had in me and all the conversation we needed. On a bright Saturday in May, we held our field day. Kids showed up early because kids always do when you let them use tools. Ben taught a clinic on in-row cultivation that made my heart feel like new hay. Lila showed how to graft an apple scion with hands that have known both scalpels and thunderstorms. Priyanka stood by a folding table with easement brochures and lemonade, answering questions in plain talk. Hank arrived in a district truck, looked at our little retention swale plan for the orchard, and gave me 3 suggestions that would save us headaches. June brought cookies and the kind of eavesdropping that smells like care. We ended by the south bay of the barn. I lifted 3 7th graders so they could touch the faint letters where great-granddad had signed his name in 1919 under milk paint. He wrote it to last, I said. Our job is to behave like we read it. That night, when the yard went blue and the crickets started their soft choir, I walked the line between the orchard and the North 40. The orange stakes were gone. New flags marked drip lines and the edges of cover crop trials. I stopped at the place where I had first seen the tape flicker and felt the fear rise in my throat like a storm I couldn't name. The air was a different shape now. Not because fear never comes back, it always does, but because it had learned what my paper could do. If you're listening to me while you fold laundry or sit in a parking lot finishing the last quiet 5 minutes of your day, here's what I want you to have from this. Honor is not a speech. It is a series of files, dates, and signatures that align with what you claim to love. I didn't win because I talked about my great-grandfather. I won because he wrote something down, my uncle remembered it, a county kept the stamp inked, a neighbor kept her word, a district kept its rules, and I stood in the right rooms with the right paper long enough for time to join my side. Revenge is the wrong word, but if you need it, call it this. I returned a thing to its right story. Caleb got his check without the power to turn our name into pavement. Prairie Ridge got a lesson in conditions precedent. The county got to say it meant what it wrote about prime soils. I got a farm in perpetuity, which is a phrase I will never say lightly again. I finished the night on the porch steps with the screen door kissing my shoulder blades. The Holloway Lane lay quiet and sure. Beyond it, the cottonwoods held up the sky like they always had, their leaves not yet fully out, their promise already complete. I thought of Evelyn's ink, May's commas, Priyanka's lists, June's chain, Hank's maps, Ben and Lila's careful boots, Uncle Ray's old stories, how all of it had braided into one rope I could hold. Inside, on the hallway wall, the frame caught a slice of evening and pushed it back into the room. Behind the glass, the words "I in perpetuity" sat plain and modest as a fence post. I ran my fingers over the wood as if it were bark, then turned off the light. Tomorrow we would check moisture and walk the wheat and argue kindly about the best day to plant beans. Tomorrow we would teach freshmen how to measure infiltration with stopwatches and pie tins. Tomorrow, if I was lucky, I would be tired at sunset for the right reasons. And 100 years from now, if paper and people keep doing their jobs, someone will stand in that South Bay, lift a child to the milk paint and feel old letters under small fingers. They'll say a name out loud and mean it. They'll step outside, look at black soil waking under spring wind, and understand that honor is what you leave written where the weather can see it.